Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 5 of the Self-Made Mastery series. I'm so excited for those of you that have already been giving a lot of feedback, especially those of you that are really enjoying this format. I know it's the last thing that you potentially want to do is to be on yet another recorded video, something to do with Zoom, something on the computer. I know that, of course, doing this in person would have a lot of positive effects. We'd have that element of community, we'd have an element of collaboration. And yet at the same time, this is about you and your business and your life of intention. Not to compare yourself to anybody else that's in the room, not to feel rushed or that you have to cut corners, but to be able to develop your own plan, look at your own numbers, think about what you want for yourself and your life in this upcoming year. And so for those of you that have taken the time, that have done the work, congratulations. For those of you that are feeling maybe a little bit behind, you might not necessarily be watching this when the episodes come about. You have been doing it at your own pace. Please know that that is completely okay, right? The understanding that is, I would much rather you have a well thought out and executable plan that is 3 or 4 weeks behind than to have a half-assed business plan that was done in just a couple of hours that you have completed before December 31st, as if you're checking a box off of the to-do list, and then it sits in a binder or it sits on your bookshelf and you don't touch it throughout the year. That's exactly what today is about. We've moved through and looked at your numbers. We've looked at both your expenses and your sources of business in week 1. In week 2 and part of week 3, we looked at your personal finances, looking at what is it that you're spending, what is it that you're saving, what is it that you're investing, and what is it that you're donating. Being able to reflect on that and ask yourself, are there any numbers around there that you want a little bit differently? You've been able to look at some of the things that are your definition of what a life of intention looks like. What are some of the trips you want to take? What are some of the memories that you'd like to make in this next year? What are some of the financial moves that you'd like to make for your future self? Maybe moving towards financial independence and financial freedom. We then moved that and said, well, how are we going to get there? You've identified how much you want to make in the new year to be able to fund that life of intention. And then you've been able to run the numbers about what it's going to cost or what you're going to need to do from a business perspective. How many transactions are you going to need to do? How much of your gross income, minus your business expenses and taxes, minus your personal expenses and taxes, minus those life of intention activities, what is going to be left over in terms of the total units that are necessary? And then last week we went through and we started to develop a 135, a GPS for you to be able to navigate through the new year around your goals, your priorities, and your strategies. Today is much of a recap, if you will, as well as some other little tidbits that might be helpful as you're moving into the new year on thinking about how do I implement all of these things that I've talked about. You know, it's very fascinating. I was having a conversation with someone who was talking to me about vision boards. And those of you that have been around me long enough know how I feel about vision boards when they're executed poorly. But quite frankly, you know, the gentleman had said it felt a little hokey. It felt a little like he was moving through the motions. And I said, of course it's going to feel that way. If you've never had an opportunity in which you believe that your activities are going to get you anywhere near the cutout of a palm tree or a Cadillac or a Bentley or that amazing chalet in the mountains, then of course, you know, cutting out photos from a magazine that you're completely disconnected from and gluing it on a 97-cent piece of cardboard or poster board is as far away from your reality as possible. I'm very blessed to be able to be in business with so many of you, especially those of you that we're working through private coaching. Many of you have had your best year in business. And so for those of you that have had those results, you know when you do the work and you follow the process, you get unbelievable results. That is the power of a vision board when you know that your activities are tied to those memories. Your activities are tied to that future self that is able to achieve those goals that you've talked about. So with that, just pause for a moment. I want you to think about where you were 5 years ago. What were you making 5 years ago? What were you doing 5 years ago? What were the relationships that you had 5 years ago? What did your self-talk look like 5 years ago? And fast forward to today. As you're maybe wrapping up the year or you're beginning the new year, You're looking at the numbers and you're with me at this moment in time. You're setting intentions for your future self. You are looking at your numbers maybe for the first time like this. You're running your business like a business. You're running your household like a business, or you're setting intentions to do those things. Think about the people and the relationships that you've built over this time. Think about how you navigated through COVID in the years of 2020, 2021, and 2022. Look at yourself and pat yourself on the back for the progress that you made. Even if the results weren't exactly what you wanted, you know that you're doing the work and that it's a matter of time before you break at that brick wall and you see yourself on the other side. So when we talk today about the harvest itself, right? You've been planting seeds. This idea of what is it that you do between the time that you begin the business plan and when you see the results? How do you keep the momentum? How do you make sure that you don't burn out? All of those activities that we talk about in terms of your daily routine, scheduling, and that's exactly what we're going to get into today. So let's go ahead and get started. Looking at your schedule and looking at the activities, there's something that can be said of, I can completely see what's important to you, and all I have to do is look at your bank account and look at your calendar, because that's exactly where you're spending your time and that's where you're spending your money. That's going to show me what you believe to have value in your life. And for a lot of us, earlier through this series, you've been able to look at where you've spent your money. You've been able to see what were some priorities for you, or maybe what were some opportunities where you spent money in things that you wouldn't necessarily define as a priority. Well, it's the same thing with your time. A lot of the schedule, we might go back. You can go back into your calendar, whether you have an at a glance, or go back and look at your Google Calendar or your iCalendar. Look at how many appointments you had. Look at some of the things that were put on the calendar for you, right? Whether you went to a networking thing with other realtors, or you went to conferences, or you spent time with friends and family, you took vacations, you went to a new thing to learn from an educational standpoint, whatever it might be. Look at where you spent your time this last year. And as you're moving into this next year, just as we talked about last week, being able to maybe build a habit of starting your morning and looking at your calendar, looking at the things that you've put on there, and asking yourself, are those things in alignment with my 135? Are those in alignment with me attracting new business? Are they in alignment with what I need to do to fund my life of intention, as well as looking at my calendar? Do I have things on my calendar that are part of my life of intention? I know that we've done this exercise for those of you that have been with me, in which if I look at your calendar, oftentimes the things that you put on your calendar are things that involve other people. So much of our activities or the way that we navigate through life is a response to others. We don't want to be judged. Or if we are judged, we want to be judged gracefully or in kind light. So we never want to be late. So when I look at your calendar, I see Orange Theory on your calendar for two reasons. One, if you don't show up, they're going to charge you for not going to the class anyway. And number two is because you want to make sure whether you're going there with friends or you're going there and your personal trainer is kind of holding you accountable. That's an important element of your life. Maybe your coaching appointment with me is on your calendar. One, you're paying for it. And two, I'm going to be there on the other side of the camera. You're looking at a listing appointment or a showing appointment or a home inspection or a closing or a meeting with a vendor or a local networking group. Again, we put things on our calendar that involve other people. But how much of the things that only you show up for are on your calendar, such as I'm scheduling time to learn a new skill, or I'm scheduling time on my calendar to plan for the next quarter's marketing plan, or I am making sure that I'm scheduling reading for myself, or I'm scheduling time to review my bank balances and what my statements look like. I'm taking the time to organize my files or to document processes for myself and my business. See, a lot of us don't necessarily go into the time blocking from that perspective. And I remember one of the things that I used to talk about with Doug is he would say, I'm not going to be a time block on your calendar. And it was, if you're not on my calendar, I'm going to fill it with something else. right? These things that I put on my calendar are priorities of mine. And if you are a priority of mine, then I need to put you on my calendar. Now, of course, we have a lot of things that go on in our world that have to do with each other, and they're not necessarily scheduled, but things like date night, like we talked about in the 7 circles, making sure that that was on the calendar and that nothing else filled that time. That if friends were like, hey, we're going to go do something on Thursday, but Thursdays were date nights, I would have to say either number 1, no, because Doug and I already have plans, or 2, I would have to ask Doug if that's something that we're both interested in, and if it is, then we would schedule something in that place, but making sure that we always moved that date night and that we didn't lose it on that particular week or weekend. I know that for some people, this idea of being so rigid and kind of time blocking can feel restrictive. And like we talked about, for those of you that identify as being more creative, there's a level of improvisation or flexibility that is a part of your identity. And I completely understand that. And just like the jazz improviser, the person who can play wonderful solos and go in far distant places from a harmonic perspective, the way that they're able to do that is because they never lost sight of the melody. They never lost sight of the harmonic structure of the original piece. So you have to know the fundamentals. You have to know the rigidity of things in order to know where you can bend the corners, where you can dance in the gray from the black and white. So by having this structure, by building these things in place, which doesn't have to be time blocked every 7 minutes or 15 minutes, but rather buckets of where I want to dedicate time and energy, well, even if I follow that 60% of the time, I have been intentional about where my time goes. You know, there's another element of this. So 1, of course, we schedule things on our calendar that involve others. But 2, when we don't have things in place, anything else looks like a priority. Think about it for a moment. If I'm sitting in my office and my door is open and you're able to walk by my door and you say, hey, do you got a minute? Or, hey, are you doing anything right now? No, what's up? What I have instantly done is I have said anything that was a priority for me, anything that I had set intentions on, anything that would have been beneficial towards my funding of a life of intention or living a life of intention, I put all of those things on pause to help you. Or maybe it's not even helping you, but it's to be able to respond to whatever it is that you have going on. Now, helping others isn't the bad thing. Being able to be there to lend a hand is not inadvertently a bad thing. What I'm saying is that if I don't take a stand for the things that are a priority for me, then any time that someone believes that you have free time means that it's theirs to take. And so part of your intentions maybe in the new year is to be a little bit more intentional with your time, to be able to set boundaries. And one of the things that I think is so insightful about this idea is that boundaries are not for the people that you're talking to or that you're interacting with. Boundaries are for you. So when someone says something bad or someone says something that you do not like, you are not saying you cannot speak to me that way. What you're saying is, if you continue to speak in this nature, I am going to walk away. The boundary is for me, it is not for you. And so when we set boundaries for the calendar, when we set boundaries for our time, when we set budgets for our money, what we are doing is we are setting those things for our own life of intention. It is the decisions that we've made and that we're holding firm to versus completely giving those things away at the near sight of either conflict or the shiny object. So when we talk about the harvest itself, we have to realize that the harvest itself is the results. And just as we talked about last week about the difference between being process-oriented and results-oriented, is something that many of you have heard me talk about before, which is to be impeccable with your now. This concept of, in my present moment, based on my financial situation, based on the things that are on my calendar, based on the stresses of my home life, my familial support, and just the support in general, what is the highest and best use of my time right now, in this present moment? And then you do that activity. And when that activity is done, you ask yourself that question again. And if at the end of my day, it was an accumulation of my being impeccable with my time, not being perfect, not saying it was completely ideal, right? But being impeccable with the time that I had. Maybe I had planned 3 hours of writing, but a fire happened, or the dog was throwing up, or I had woken up not necessarily in the greatest of moods, or I have been neglecting my physical health, so I chose to do a workout in the morning, which cut into my 3 hours of writing. Well, there's a part of me that can talk about the shackles of should, or that could kind of beat up on myself for not doing what I said I was going to do. And then there's the other part that says, okay, you've spent an hour and 20 minutes of your 3 hours that was allotted, but you have an hour and 40 minutes left. What is the highest and best use of this time now that you have an awareness in this present moment? What is the best thing that I can do at this present moment? And if I continue to ask myself those questions by the end of the day, well, then it was accumulation of what I could do by being impeccable with my now, by being intentional in that present moment. And if I do that tomorrow, and I do that the next day, then at the end of 365 days, at the end of a year, no matter what the results are, I'm going to be proud of what the results are because they were an accumulation of me being impeccable with those now moments throughout my day. This is the idea of moving from process-oriented to results-oriented. You know, I think, and I know we've used a lot of these kind of references to agricultural farming, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. And so realizing that, you know, I might go and till the land that's out in my backyard. I might put in some great soil. I might put a little bit of compost on top of that. I might plant seeds. And I might water it and protect it from frost and protect it from vermin and build a deer fence to make sure that nothing goes after it. And when it comes time for harvest that first year, I might not get all of the results that I wanted. Well, that's very common in agricultural farming. That maybe your first 2 years, your first 2 cycles of crops are not going to yield you 100% of the potential of the land because I have to put nutrients back into that space. I have to build a foundation for that space. And so for any of you that are maybe making a change to your goals in 2023, whether it's your healthy eating habits, or it's going to the gym, or it's saving money on a monthly basis, or being in more of a relationship with your finances, or spending more time with your spouse, realizing that maybe the first few times that you do this, you're not going to get a 100% of the harvest that you're looking for. But you're putting the nutrients into the soil. You're laying a foundation for yourself, realizing that we're talking about a life of intention. We're not talking about 6 weeks of intention or a year of intention. We're talking about a life of intention. And just as we talked about The Biggest Loser in the previous episode of this series, it's that idea that you are becoming the person that is being intentional with your life. You're becoming the person that's intentional with the relationships and how you show up with others. You're becoming intentional about the way that you spend your money, you save your money, you invest your money, and you donate your money. You're being intentional and becoming the person who is intentional with how they set boundaries for themselves and their time. It's a process. And so giving yourself just a little bit of grace and understanding that every day, as you come to this space with an open heart and an open mind and continuing to push forward, you realize that you make these incremental changes that are truly transformative. Now, looking at yourself and looking at the harvest. So you've taken your 135, you're moving it into your calendar, is the level of accountability. Self-accountability is a mirage. Many of you know that. It looks like you can touch it. You can see it in the mirror. It looks like it's there. But the second that it's tested, you watch it falter. I know myself, right? If I'm at the gym or if I'm working out and I'm feeling a level of stress, I'm probably going to tap out if I'm by myself at about 85% or 90%. But if I'm paying a personal trainer and that personal trainer is standing over me and is encouraging me on going one more, just go a little bit further, I know that I'm going to get more out of myself than if I was just going to do that with my own self, right? I remember there was a woman, many of you know Sabina, a woman that lived near me, that was a coworker of mine and a very good friend. And we were both committed to walking in the morning. And because of the fact that there was that accountability partner, if I had to wake up at 5 a.m. by myself and it was cold in the morning, it was dark, maybe I drank too much, or I didn't go to sleep when I should have, I didn't turn the TV off early enough, I would absolutely sleep through that 5 a.m. if I was by myself. But knowing that Sabina was already parked in my driveway, she was waiting on me, she was counting on me, meant that when that 5 o'clock alarm went off, I was not going back to bed because I was not going to let her down. And we talked about positive consequences or positive affirmation and negative consequences, and so knowing yourself as well with having an accountability partner, whether that is someone close to you, maybe that's someone else in our coaching community that can be an accountability partner for you. But one of the most important aspects about accountability partnership is realizing no matter who it is, you are showing up for yourself and you're showing up for them, right? Now, you're not being the Simon Cowell of judging and belittling that other person, but realizing that you will get out of your accountability partner what you put into it. If you believe that the accountability partner is just there for them to hold you accountable and you not to hold them accountable, or you not to pull your weight, well, then that's a problem. If I pay for a personal trainer, I pay maybe 30 minutes or an hour of that personal trainer's time. That personal trainer is expecting me to do all of the work in between our sessions. But at the same time, I expect that personal trainer to point out my flaws, to correct my technique, to take a look at my micros and my macros and be very intentional about what I'm doing. So there's this element of, if you're looking for accountability in the new year, and let's say it's even with me as your coach, to believe that I, by myself, am going to motivate you is completely wrong. It's the wrong mindset. If you're not coming to me in between coaching sessions with ideas, or I'd like to discuss this, or you're asking me to help you hold yourself accountable by sending you text messages or checking in with you, or you have to report your numbers, realizing that accountability is a two-way street. It is something that you show up for yourself as well as you're enlisting the help of others, right? Realizing that if you're the type of person that letting someone else down is more of a motivator than letting yourself down, then realizing that that person's existence in and of itself is allowing you to hold yourself accountable. So looking at your calendar, looking at your 1 through 5, looking at what is the support that you need, and we're going to talk about this a little bit further in next week in terms of your winning team and the leverage that you use to make sure that you're hitting the goals that you're looking for. But when we're talking about it here in terms of the harvest of making sure you're looking for some of those things. Do you know when it's going to frost? Do you know the type of beetles or rodents that are going to eat at your leaves or at your fruit? It's the same thing with your business. Do you know where you tend to falter? Do you falter with your money? Do you falter with your time? Do you find that there's a distraction from working from home? If you do not have a dedicated space, if you do not have that buy-in from your children or your spouse, partner, significant other to know, listen, when I go into this room and I shut this door, I'm in here until I come out, and I need you to respect that, right? If that doesn't work for you, or if you realize, much like me, it had been something that I had to work on and kind of build the calluses of habit around, working from home was not good for me. Not because I didn't like not driving, not because I needed social interaction. It was because I would take the dogs out all the time, or I would see that I need to do a load of laundry, or I would do dishes, or I would clean up a little bit of the house, or I'd run the vacuum. Not that any of those things are bad, trust me, right? The house is clean, the dogs are happy. The problem is that if I had dedicated this time of working, but I'm not really working because there's a distraction, a 20-minute distraction here, a 15-minute distraction there, a 30-minute distraction there, all of a sudden my 8 hours of productivity has been whittled down to 5. And if I'm not being 100% intentional with my 5 hours, I might only be giving a real, true, honest 3 hours of work. Well, if that's the case, why won't I just dedicate 4 solid hours of work and then take the rest of the day to go do whatever I want? And that's exactly one of the things that is a mindset change for a lot of us, which is for many of us that moved from being employees to self-employed or employees to business owners, is as an employee, it's you give 40 hours. You and I know that most people are not giving 100% for 40 hours. They're probably giving 100% for 18 hours. They're giving about 80% for another 10 of those hours or 5 of those hours. And then the remaining is what most of Friday looks like, or what most of after lunchtime looks like, of chatter and coffee breaks and scrolling on Facebook or taking a quiz or reading some article, right? In which Outlook and Facebook are toggled back and forth. So your supervisor, as they walk by, you can look like you're being really productive. So there's almost this idea that many of us have that's like, oh, I've got to do 15-hour days, 16-hour days. I've got to work, as if busyness, B-U-S-Y-N-E-S-S, can actually be the definition of business, B-U-S-I-N-E-S-S. And one of the things that we have to be very intentional about, looking at our calendar, looking at the 135, looking at what funding a life of intention looks like and living a life of intention looks like, is realizing that I would much rather you dedicate 7 solid hours to work and then go enjoy the life of intention than have 15 hours of half-ass work, of procrastination and other things, so that you can convince yourself that you're working because you're busy and that you're doing work-related stuff, but you're completely robbing yourself from going and enjoying the world that you're a part of, to go enjoy the hobbies that you've neglected, to go enjoy the people in your world that you have pushed off so that you can stress about money and other things. Realizing that busyness, right, that Y versus the I in business is the difference for me. So looking at busyness versus business, right, B-U-S-Y-N-E-S-S versus B-U-S-I-N-E-S-S, is that the person who's focused on busyness asks themselves, why am I not getting the results that I'm looking for? The person who's being intentional with their time, their money, with what is on their 135, is focused on the business, and they're the person that is saying, I am in control. You get to decide whether you're going to focus on a year of busyness or a year of business. And recession, no recession, looking at the things that you have control over, looking at the realization of no matter what happens to the market, there are still people that are buying your product. There are still people that need your service. It is your job to go find those people, identify those people, and make sure that they know that you are the choice when it is time for them to buy that product or service. That's what we're going to be focusing on this next week. That's what we're going to be focusing on in the weeks to come. And so one of the things to realize, and we talked a little bit about this in week 4, is I'd love for you to do the exercise of essentially what your homework is this week, is to go and make sure that you're setting those things up ahead of time, looking at your marketing calendar, looking at the production calendar. You know the things that you need to do on a day-to-day. You know what a pipeline might need to look like for yourself and your business. That's where we can get a little bit more intentional in looking at your conversions. So for those of you that might be checking and looking and saying, okay, I have a certain number of transactions that I need to fund my life. I know that there is a certain break. Maybe if I'm having conversations with you, it might take me a week. It might take me 3 months. It might take me a year from our initial conversation to getting you to do a sale, right? To pay for the product or service. Well, that conversion rate would be from contract to close, right? Or from commitment to payment. Well, then we have to go a step further back and ask, well, how many conversations or consultations do I need to have before I get a confirmation that they're going to use my product or service, and then my payment? So what's the conversion rate from going on an appointment to getting a yes? And that's a conversation. And then going a step further from that is asking ourselves, well, how many conversations do I need to have, interactions with others, before I get a consultation, before I get my confirmation, before I get my payment? So looking at yourself and your business is to ask yourself, well, if I need to have 10 conversations to get one person to say, sure, I'll have a consultation with you to find out what your products and services are, what it would look like to work with you, then I need to realize, well, how many of those consultations are necessary before I get a yes? Well, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, which means I need to have 30 conversations right? To get the 3 consultations so that I get the 1 confirmation and realizing that 30 days later I get paid. This way we're able to build a pipeline and understanding what is the pipeline necessary to fund that life of intention, to run the business, to be able to have the results that I'm looking for. Now, for some of us, we go, man, I don't have control of those things. I could have one really great conversation and it can lead to payment. Well, of course, and congratulations. But if that's not duplicable, if that's not something that someone else joins your team or they join your business and they can't get those same results, we have to do the same process for them. Again, next week, we're going to talk about your winning team and how to lead your winning team, how to recruit to your winning team. But for now, we have to start with ourselves and asking ourselves, what does that look like? So in quarter 1, again, maybe you're a real estate agent and based on our numbers last week, we said you needed to do 36 transactions. Well, that would be 3 closings a month. Well, that would be 9 closings for the first quarter. Well, knowing yourself and knowing that I might have conversations with people, they might say that they're looking for a home, but maybe financing doesn't work on, or there are variables that I don't have control over. Maybe I'm looking out and I'm seeing that, the variables that I don't have control over is what's on the market. If the house they're looking for is not available, it's not going to happen. Or if they're looking for new construction and it's not going to be built until August, I can't guarantee that it's going to close by March because those are variables I don't have control over. So if I need to have 9 closings in the first quarter, and let's say that I have a 75% conversion rate, right? Well, then that means that I need to have 12 people in the pipeline that are actively raising their hand saying, I want to buy and sell within the next 90 days in order to have my 9 closings. Well, if I need to have 12 people in the pipeline, well, how many conversations were necessary for me to get 12 yeses? Well, maybe the answer is I needed to talk to 20 people or have consultations with 20 people in order to find my 12 that are saying yes right now so that I can have my 9 closings by the end of March. Well, now my activities as I move through my days is going, where are my 20? That's what I'm putting on the Post-it notes that I have in my office on my computer. I have it on the mirror in my bathroom. I'm doing the activities that are there to make sure that I am being focused on finding the 20. When I spend an afternoon at the mall, or if I look at my morning and I wasn't as intentional with my time in the morning, I'm asking myself, what did I do today to find my 20? Or to be impeccable with my now, what am I doing right now to find my 20? Based on my resources, based on my finances, based on my bandwidth, based on my emotional state, what can I do in this present moment to go find my 20? It's a very different way of moving through life versus what should I be doing right now versus what can I be doing right now to find my 20? Those are 2 very different questions, and we're going to get 2 very different answers based on those questions. So moving through, first of all, I would love for you to look at the goals that you had set, looking at your 1 through 5, looking at the numbers that you had set in the beginning of this series. And I want you to ask yourself, how many transactions are necessary based on your goals to close within the first quarter? Once you've figured out how many transactions you need, I want you to ask yourself, how large does your pipeline need to be so that you can have those closings by the end of quarter 1? And then taking it a step further is realizing that that pipeline needs to be established essentially by the end of January to give yourself enough time so that you can have those closings by the end of March. So go ahead and hit pause, run those numbers. How many closings or transactions do you need in the first quarter? And how many people need to be in your pipeline in order to achieve that by the end of the first quarter? Go ahead and hit pause, and when you're ready, continue on. So now that you've identified your pipeline and you've looked at those activities for quarter 1, now you get to ask yourself from a marketing and a prospecting perspective, right? What do I need to do for lead generation to build that pipeline? Are there any holidays that I can take advantage of? Are there any newsletters that I need to get out? Are there any postcards or printed mail that I'm going to be working on? Are there conventions that I'm planning to go to? Are there community events that I can be present at? And you go ahead and you look for those events, you look for those holidays that you can highlight, you look for those opportunities of marketing and lead generation, social media, video, whatever those activities are. And I want you to take the calendar that's a part of your workbook or your own annual calendar or Google Calendar, whatever you'd like, and start to put those activities on your calendar, both your due date and your initiation date, right? So if I want that postcard to be out by the 15th, it's going to be on my calendar that postcard is out on the 15th. But then I'm going to go backwards and I'm going to find out when is the start date that I'm working on the postcard. So many of you recently, we just had, maybe those of you that celebrated Christmas or Hanukkah, the New Year's maybe has just happened for you. It's so fascinating to me that business owners get sideswiped. And they have no idea that for whatever reason that Christmas happens the same time every year. Or they don't realize that Thanksgiving happens the same time every November. Or they didn't have a post prepared, or they wanted to participate in the Dr. Martin Luther King breakfast in their local community, but they didn't think about it, or they're too late to be a part of the sponsorship to take advantage of that opportunity. Or the tickets were sold out and now they can't attend. It's the same day every year. So taking the time now, looking at your calendar now, and saying, what are those things that I want to commit to? And if an entire year feels overwhelming, start with the quarter. Just look at now through the 1st of April. Go ahead and put those activities down on your calendar. Look through your next week in terms of what you can be intentional with your time, and realizing that there's always this balance between working on our current business and what are we doing to attract new business. This idea that for so many of you having that roller coaster of income, right? You focus on lead generation, you get the clients, you service the clients, you stop focusing on lead generation, and then you close the deal, you look around, you pay some bills, and you realize that you've got to go do this all over again. You got to starve and pinch pennies until the next closing. As always asking yourself every day, what am I doing to focus on current business? And what am I doing to focus on future business? See, this idea that we talked about of you really protecting your morning from, say, 7:30 in the morning until noon, that is your what am I doing to attract new business. That's things like this, building your marketing plan. It's things like we're discussing about setting intentions for events. It's these things that we're talking about in terms of reaching out to people through phone calls or Facebook messages or attending certain things. Realizing that your morning is what am I doing for tomorrow and attracting future business, and my afternoon is servicing my current business. So looking this next week and talking about what can you do to protect the harvest and to plan for the harvest is to really look at your time, setting intentions on your calendar, setting intentions on what marketing looks like for you for the first quarter. Looking at what are the activities that you need to do in order to establish your own level of accountability. Building your own defense on yourself and knowing some of the distractions that you have. If you need to go into a workspace, you need to go work at a coffee shop because working from home is not effective for you. Be intentional in that. I know that this can feel overwhelming to those of you that feels like this is splitting hairs in so many aspects of my life that I don't feel like I'm living. But realize that this is that concept that if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. Or other words, if you're not being proactive with your life, you will react to everyone else's life. I'm not asking for you to change everything about yourself. I'm not asking you to micromanage every minute. What I am asking you to do is to pause and say, what do I want from my life before someone else makes that decision for me? I know that this is a lighter week. We've been doing a lot of work. It's the second to last one. I'm very excited to have many of you a part of this journey and for you to continue to do the work on yourself. Realize that, yes, we do have our live Q&A. We will have that this Friday. But if you need to reach out to me. If you're bringing it along during your one-on-one coaching sessions. If you're not a part of the coaching community and you're looking for one-on-one accountability, or if you are a part of the coaching community and you realize that this last year you phoned it in, you weren't 100% committed, you didn't show your best at every one of our sessions, that's okay. Let's have a conversation. Let's build a game plan. Let's figure out, how can I help hold you accountable? How can I help you achieve the goals that you have for yourself? Don't worry, I'm already going to be bringing these conversations up in our coaching sessions to come, but realizing that you have to be the one that takes a stand for yourself in this new year. And I promise you that I will be there every step of the way if you would like me to be there. I hope you have a wonderful week. If you have any questions, please reach out, and I'll see you next week for our last episode of the Self-Made Mastery series. Bye, everybody.